Hi, third grade. Today we're going to talk about reading about time and sequence. Our learning target at the top says, using time and sequence words will help you understand how events in history are connected. Do you like a good story? Then you probably enjoy history. History is the story of events that happened in the past. Historical events are usually told in a sequence, which is the order in which they happened. The sequence can help you understand the relationships or connections between those events. When you read, look for signal words that give clues about time order and sequence. First, next, and finally are signal words. So are phrases such as later that year and in 1864. Read the cartoon below. What's happening? How are the events related? In the first picture, it says, first, the Vikings sailed to North America. Next, they started a settlement. After a few difficult years, the Vikings gave up and returned home. Now go ahead and flip the page. It says, read the cartoon again. Notice the signal words that are used. Now fill in the chart below by writing the events in the order in which they happened. First, do you remember what happened? What sentence can you write here? Right, the Vikings sailed to North America. That's the continent that we live on. Then next, they did what when they got here? Right, they began to build settlements. After a few years, what happened? Right, they returned home. Now it says to talk. Think about the second and third things that happened in the cartoon. What's the relationship between those two? Well, I think they had a lot of trouble with building these settlements. And because they had the trouble, then after a few years, they got frustrated and returned home. Was the third event what you expected? I personally was not expecting that they gave up, right? We always read stories that have messages about perseverance and the importance of never giving up. And here these Vikings gave up after a few years of challenges. Not what I was personally expecting at all. All right. If you turn your page one more time, we're going to read a history text here known as The Adventures of the Growing Nation. Okay. If you look down in the corner before we read, it wants us to underline signal words that tell you the order in which events happened. And think about how those events are all related to each other. All right, so here we go. This is obviously a map of the United States here, and it doesn't look like the map that we see today, maybe in your agenda book. It doesn't have the 50 states, does it? In fact, if you look, the United States here is this red part, and it wasn't even the whole thing. This green area here was known as the Spanish territory. That was not yet the United States of America. All right, so I'm guessing that this is going to talk about, based on the title, how the United States of America grew and became the nation that we know more of today. All right, let's get started. Follow along with me so we can do a nice job answering the questions. Paragraph 1. Imagine that in one day, our country doubled in size. That's what happened to the United States in 1803. President Thomas Jefferson asked France to sell the United States a vast area of land. Overnight, America added more than 828,000 square miles of land west of the Mississippi River. This is known as the Louisiana Purchase. All right, so what this is saying is that overnight in 1803, Thomas Jefferson, the president, it used to look like this, and then he purchased from France all of this territory up here in yellow. Okay, and it doubled the size of the country. I don't think yet that this part of the country was mentioned. Let's see if it mentions it in the future. Oh, and by the way, one of those sequence words is anytime it mentions a year, that tells you when something happened. So I would underline that year there in 1803. All right, let's go on to paragraph 2 here. Jefferson wanted to know the fastest way across the new land. At the time, there were no maps of the whole country. Jefferson asked Meriwether Lewis to explore the area. Lewis was an army captain whom Jefferson trusted. Lewis chose another soldier, William Clark, to help him lead the party. Okay, so these two people, we know them as Lewis and Clark. They're two separate people. President Thomas Jefferson wanted them, he hired them to be explorers and to kind of explore the new land that now belonged to the United States because there were no maps. No one knew what kind of land this was. Paragraph 3. To get ready, they first had a large boat built. The boat took the men down the Ohio River. Then they built a base camp near St. Louis, Missouri. They spent the winter of 1803 there. Finally, on May 14th, 1804, Lewis and Clark began their famous trip into the territory. 50 men went with them. Okay, so they were building, here's this key word I noticed. First, they built a what? Boat. Okay, then they built a base camp, right? Because they didn't want to be traveling out during the winter months. It would maybe be too dangerous and too harsh. Okay, so finally they started observing the land and exploring the land in 1804 with 50 other men. Okay, and again, these dates, you could also underline them. They spent the winter in 1803 at their camp that they built in St. Louis, Missouri. And then here on May 14th, 1804, they began their famous trip. All right. They traveled for over 18 months. Finally, the group made it to the Pacific Ocean. Now, I want you to know, the Pacific Ocean, in case you don't know, is all the way over here. We know this is California today, but all the way over here is the Pacific Ocean. On this side, close to us, if you ever go to the beaches in the Carolinas or Delaware or New Jersey or Maryland, that's all the Atlantic Ocean that you would see. But if you go over to California or Hawaii, you would see the Pacific Ocean. And that's where they got to. After 18 months, that's a year and a half. It's a long time to be away, traveling and exploring. On November 7th, 1805, Clark wrote, "Ocean in view, oh, the joy." The group spent a long, cold winter near the ocean. They began the trip back home in March of 1806. So now they have to come all the way back home, too. Lewis and Clark arrived in St. Louis in September 1806. They were greeted with a big party. A century later, okay, I hope you know what a century means. A decade is 10 years. A century is 100. Just like there are 100 cents in a dollar, a century has 100 years in it. So a century later in 1904, the World's Fair was held in St. Louis. People honored Lewis and Clark's journey at the fair because look how long it took them from 1804, right? Didn't they start their journey right here? Technically, in 1803, they were gone from their families and friends back home because they were spending the winter in Missouri there. So from 1803 until 1806, that's a long time to be away. Very interesting, though. They were very famous explorers that I'm sure you will learn more about in history class in the future. All right, turn your page in your packet and let's look at this chart here. It says, reread the text to find out the events of Lewis and Clark's journey. List those events in the graphic organizer. So if you underline these key words like first, or the winter of 1803, what happened in May 1804, what happened in November 1805, and September 1806, what were the key events? They give you the first one. President Jefferson asks Meriwether Lewis to explore the new land. Do you remember what happened in 1803 in the winter? You can mention it wasn't just Lewis, it was also Lewis and who? Clark, right. Lewis and Clark spend the winter in St. Louis. Remember, they stayed at their base camp? So I would write a sentence there and always look back in the text to help you with that sentence. If you skim down to where it says May of 1804, that's down in paragraph 3 as well. What happened? Right, Lewis and Clark begin their journey, you could say. They're exploring the new territory. If you keep going in order, November of 1805, it mentions that in paragraph 4. What important thing happens there? Right, they see the Pacific Ocean. They reached and made it to the Pacific Ocean. And then in September 1806, they arrived back in St. Louis. And they did have a big party for them, it said. They were greeted with a big party to celebrate all of their work and exploration that they've done. Okay, we're going to jump down to where it says short response. And here is where you are going to use your RACES graphic organizer on the back page to write your answer. It says, what are the important events in the journey of Lewis and Clark? Include details from paragraphs 3, 4, and 5 in your answer. Use the space provided to write your answer. So this, boys and girls, what we just did up here in question 1 is a really good way to set you up for success with your written response. When you go to restate, I would maybe just say, Lewis and Clark many important events occurred during the journey of Lewis and Clark, okay? Or during Lewis and Clark's journey to explore the territory. And then you could say, for example, first use those. I would definitely be using signal words in your answer, okay? And I would definitely even use these ideas that we came up with up here because those did come right from the text, didn't they? All right, third grade, do your very best work on that, and I will see you next time.